All right, welcome to our second event in the Link Lab Fall Speaker Series. We're very pleased today to have Karen Hyder join us to give us some guidance and instruction on how to use synchronous tools well in the learning process. I've known Karen for several years now, and about 2 years ago, spent some time with her leading a course on the future of education, and she was involved with guiding the synchronous discussions and helping us work through some of the challenges of teaching online and working with guest speakers that were coming in during that course. During that time, I certainly noted Karen is one of the most talented folks I've certainly interacted with around synchronous instruction. And as we noted in the session that we did earlier last week, that was Peggy Semmingson and I did, where we looked at some of the research around analytics, sorry, not around analytics, but around the synchronous instructional processes. The research from there made it quite clear that it's an area that's underrepresented to date. There's not enough activity yet on synchronous instruction, even though there's a range of benefits that were clear regarding social connection and social cohesion and the ability to provide a sense of belongingness to students that participate. So it's a real privilege here to have one of the folks that I think is most capable in this topic area lead us in how she leads sessions and the kinds of lessons that we can learn from her. Karen, over to you.
Thanks so much, George. I always love a build-up like that because then the expectations are nice and high, and so if I stumble at all, I get the rotten tomatoes. No, hopefully that won't be the case today, but thanks so much, everybody, for your time and attention. I'm eager to talk to you today about really the basics for delivering instruction synchronously. It's something I am passionate about and have been doing for 15 years now, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and talking about it and supporting people who are using these technologies. I would like to invite you to, if you want to use your microphone during today's session, you don't have to, but if you'd like to use a microphone, go ahead and let me know that that's your intention, and I'll give you some instructions on screen to set up your audio, and then we'll be able to hear your voice whenever you click your unmute button. So if you're interested, I'm watching your status indicators. Actually, I'll give you a screen for this. If you would like to set up your audio, oopsie, go ahead and show your hand raise status indicator. So you're using the black toolbar across the top of your screen. Thanks, Nori. I appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over microphone controls to Nori, and she'll be able to use her microphone. So Nori, what I'm going to ask you to do next is just to follow the instructions on screen to connect your audio, and then when it prompts you, click Allow. And whenever you're ready, go ahead and start speaking. I think your microphone is active now.
Can you hear me?
I do hear you. Yep. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. I'll go ahead and mute myself. Can I do that on the? Yeah.
Absolutely. You're going to use the green microphone icon at the top of the screen. So I want to start off our session not so much talking about what we're going to talk about, but jumping right into what we're already talking about. So you heard George's introduction to our session, fairly standard for any online event you might do. Then I jumped right into some technical support for participants that wanted to use the tools available in the software interface. And that's something you should expect at the beginning of every session. You're going to have some administrative elements that you need to cover about the program, but you also have some technical details. It's best not to make assumptions that participants just know what to do and how to do it. In some cases they do, and they will have had lots of experience using the tools, but it's too much to assume that they will just magically know how to use these tools, especially when it comes to fine-tuning elements of the interface. Like in this case, notice my slide here that looks kind of complicated but has saved me a few times, in that if participants' microphones are not if it's not their headset microphone that's picking up audio, instead it's their built-in microphone that's picking up audio, it sounds very hollow and distant, of course. So this is the place within Adobe Connect that they can go to just change the audio source. But to try to explain that to somebody who isn't really understanding what you're saying can be difficult. And if you're explaining it over and over again as participants join the audio, it can be repetitive and, of course, tedious. So adding a slide like this to your introductory deck can mean you can convey instructions about the software interface without having to repeat yourself over and over again. So think about that. What will you be able to show at the beginning of your sessions that will help support the technical setup, the technical lead-in, alongside with your administrative and content-related lead-in? So I'm going to pause there. I see you've been typing in chat, so I'm going to go ahead and see what that's about. Yeah, great. Okay, thanks so much. I see your comments there. And of course, I've got a handful of slides like this that sometimes I keep in a separate slide file, a separate deck that's generic and I use just whenever I need it. And sometimes I embed those slides right within my instructional materials so that they're available to me conveniently. And also if I transfer this file, those files or those slides are included in that. So you can see I've got some here about how to use chat, which many of you have already mastered. And I also have some further instructions on how this chat pod can be used in a slightly different way, where we can essentially pass private notes between presenters and participants or individual participants. And some don't like the idea of participants passing notes behind their backs, but it can be useful when we're dealing with technical troubleshooting. If I don't want to distract everybody with the conversation about why your microphone isn't working, I might be having that private chat, and then the participants who you're private chatting with will see a secondary tab at the bottom of that chat pod. So I'd like you to find a friend in the attendees list and go ahead and use the instructions on the screen to start a private chat with that person. And you could just say hello, or you can let them know what you're most looking forward to in today's session. Okay, I'm getting carried away with my conversation about Kathy, or with Kathy. I hope you all had the opportunity to explore that chat function because it's something that you might not even notice, much less make use of, but it can be helpful if only for technical troubleshooting. In tomorrow's session, I'll show you how to use that private chat function a little bit differently, where you could have essentially fake breakout activities, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. So I also like to teach people to use the status indicators, and my animations are funny here, but I like to teach people how to use the status indicators at the top of the screen because that can become my impromptu polling function, my binary polling function. So I can say things like, hey, if everybody's hearing me okay, please change your status to green check mark. So please go ahead and change your status to green check mark if indeed you are hearing me now. And of course, if you're not hearing me, my next instruction won't make much sense. So I'm going to go ahead and type my next instruction in chat. So I need to be thinking in terms of what the features are that are available to me and what might be happening to the participants on their end of the session. So maybe they're not hearing me and that's why they're not participating, or maybe they're having some kind of technical difficulties. So I want to get this part of the conversation out of the way as early as possible and get people comfortable using the features. And I see lots of green check marks there, although I can't confirm whether Dragan and Oh, Pam, right in under the wire there, RR, I don't know who that is, but I hope you can hear me okay. And I'm going to keep moving through our content here. And as you saw at the beginning of our session, I posted this little biography slide of my own to let you know that, yes, I have been thinking and talking about this stuff for many years. And I hope that you can see already by my style and by the tools that we've already been using at the beginning of this session that I intend for this to be a fairly immersive program and one that you can adopt some of the techniques from. So I encourage you to use the features that I've already used, and I encourage you to begin sessions similarly to how we began this session. Jump right in using the technology, clarify things, and thanks, Dragan, it's good to see you, and also get participants typing in chat. I do want to encourage you to shut down Facebook or Instant Messenger or your Outlook mail or whatever you might be using that could be a distraction. But if you like to tweet while you're learning, I encourage you to open up Twitter or Hootsuite or one of your tools and go ahead and tweet as we're working today. And as you can see from my little bluebird there, animations here in Adobe Connect do work. So if you animate things in PowerPoint, they'll still be animated here in Adobe Connect. But once the file is uploaded, I can't edit it. I have to go back to PowerPoint to make any changes and then re-upload that changed file into the interface. I do want to invite you to contribute to our conversation today by typing in chat and responding to polls. And then if you have any questions throughout the session, don't wait until the end. Go ahead and type your questions in chat at any time, and I'll pause periodically and read and respond as best I can. Now, wow, this is a big list. You know, as I was thinking about these two sessions, I thought about all the zillions of things I wanted to tell you. So instead of sitting down and writing really beautiful objectives that were very well designed, I just came up with a honkin' big list of all the things that I thought you might want to learn about. And I'm curious to know which of these you really do want to learn about. So I'm going to stay quiet for a minute here, and I'm going to let you read these. And if it appeals to you at all, go ahead and click on the check boxes here. And I'm going to keep the broadcast results turned off so your answers don't influence each other. So I'm just going to stay quiet here and let you read this. I'm glad to see that Friday's session got selected, so at least 2 people will be attending Friday's session. That's great. This is just one big poll. I've had up to 60 responses in a poll, so I know that you can have lots and lots of possible responses. I could have made this 2 polls and been clear about Thursday's content versus Friday's content. But I really wanted to just kind of keep things simple. I want to show you that the features of this software can support the conversation that you want to have with your learners. So I could have read this bulleted list to you and said, I want to cover all these things and I think all these things are important, but I thought it'd be useful to ask you. And in a physical classroom, I might have had a show of hands or, I don't know, secret ballot. I could have had a lot of different tools that would have helped me get to this information. But by capturing it this way, and by giving you the opportunity to vote on what we're going to cover, I feel like we can have a more learner-focused session. So I'm going to keep this list off to the side here, and I'm going to reference this as we go through our content. Of course, I do have a linear presentation in mind, but I'll know where to really focus my attention because of what you voted. The tool that I used to post this survey was polling here in Adobe Connect. It's just a function that is built right into the software interface. To access it, I can use the pods menu, choose poll, and then add new poll. And that gives me a blank poll to work with where I can fill in the blanks. And of course, you can't see this the same way I do because you're logged in here as a participant. So in a few minutes, I'm going to change the orientation of your view. I'm going to share my screen and show you what Adobe Connect looks like to me. So you'll have a better perspective on what the options are. But for now, I'd like you to stay in your sort of restricted role as a participant and see what the interface is like for you. See what kinds of things we can do here. And here's the second half of that list. So thanks everybody for responding to that. And I think what's crucial in an online environment, because you're not my captive audience, I can't close the door behind you and keep you here while we learn. I'm going to ask you to please agree to participate. That means please agree to not let yourself get distracted in multitasking, shopping online. eBay is my new weakness. It's so easy to end up in eBay finding something I don't really need. So please stay away from eBay and your inbox. Stay with us here in this conversation for the next, how much time do we have left here? About 45 minutes, because there's a lot here that you can experience. There's a lot you can learn. I will say Adobe Connect, of all the virtual classroom software tools, has a pretty steep learning curve. And what I propose to you is over the next 2 days, I'm going to help you flatten that learning curve. I want to show you how these tools work, how you can make them work to your advantage and the advantage of your learners, and how to avoid some of the pitfalls that you know are right around the corner. So, okay, terrific. I appreciate your honesty. A couple people did say that they were going to play it by ear, and that's fine. All I want to know is where we stand. If I make assumptions that you're with me and then you're not, it's going to be difficult for me down the road. But if you tell me, you know what, I really can't stay focused on this, great. You're a grown-up. I'll let you make that decision for yourself. But as far as your experience with using tools like Adobe Connect or WebEx or whatever other virtual classroom features you might use, I want to know how you really feel about it so far. Do you feel like you're a fish out of water? This is completely unnatural for you? Or maybe you're not a fish at all. You're a fish in water. Which is it? So I'm going to go ahead and broadcast the results so you can see what your colleagues are responding. Great. I see a lot of people already love it. Oh, but it's not easy, Nori. Yep, absolutely. And I always say I have a love-hate relationship with this software, Adobe Connect. I've been using it for about 10 years now, since it was Macromedia Breeze. And there are things about it that really make my life as a trainer and as an online event producer so much easier. Not the least of which is this session room is persistent. When I log out and back in again, everything is exactly the way I left it. So if you typed in chat, your chat text will still be there until I clear it. So imagine now, if I'm a chemistry teacher, of course I teach chemistry in the chemistry lab. If I'm a French teacher, I teach in the French classroom. If I'm teaching this course, Getting Started with Synchronous, I'm going to use this room, and I could potentially use it and reuse it and reuse it. So that gives me a huge advantage as far as using all these different features. Ooh, in Siberia, terrific. Okay, so I see a lot of you are really doing it already and loving it, and a handful of you are on the fringes here. You're just getting started. So I want to introduce you to the interface you're seeing right here. Connect is not for free. It's licensed by the university. As users, as individual users, we're visitors on the university's license. So notice you've got, and these arrows might not point exactly in the right places, but you've got audio controllers, you've got status or feedback indicators like the green check mark, red X menu that you saw earlier. You've got the participant list on the right side of the screen and the chat on the right side of the screen. You've got a PowerPoint file that's uploaded right in the middle here that I've been advancing through just by using the next button. I'm just nexting through the slides. And oops, hang on, you're not seeing the poll. So I'd like you to watch this carefully. Notice I'm uncovering the poll pod that was previously covered up with the PowerPoint pod. So one pod can happen on top of another pod. And this is just like in Windows, how you can have a window open on top of another window. And thanks, I see somebody just jumped right in there. And yes, absolutely, the presenter screen is different, and I would say it's very, very different. So I'll show you that perspective in just a minute. So yeah, you're right, George. Even if you're using some other tool that's not Adobe Connect, some of the things we're going to talk about today and tomorrow will still apply there. Of course, I'm going to be focusing on the Adobe Connect features because that's the room we're in, and for many of you, this is the tool you'll be using. This tool is unique in that it's object-oriented. You know, each of these items on screen is a movable, sizable object. So I can place these items on screen where I want them, and I can set up interactions. What you aren't seeing here, and hang on just a second, I'm going to cover this up. What you aren't seeing here is my webcam in the top corner. So I'm going to move my photo out of the way there. I like to have that as just my backup. And I'll show you what I really look like, not in a studio 10 years ago, but this is what I really look like. In my home office here in New York State, kind of in the middle of a cornfield here. I can show you my image, and you might notice my lips aren't quite synced up with my video like a Godzilla movie. And that can become annoying over time. But more than that, this can monopolize my system resources. So I'm going to pause my recording here, or my webcam. Hang on. I'll give you a nice smile there so you can see me while I'm talking. But more than just, distracting you, it can be that using my webcam could cause my audio to start to fluctuate. You know, I am limited in the amount of stuff I can shove up the pipe to the internet from here. So I need to be cautious about how I use these resources. Today, right now, in this session, me having a clear audio signal to you is the most important thing. If you want to see me, you can see me in this photo vision. Some sessions, though, seeing the teacher's face or seeing the student's face becomes the most important thing. So you might need to reconsider your voice over IP option, or reconsider whether you're using a wired or wireless connection to the internet, because all those things are factors in managing your resources. So I'll let you look at this one for a while. So I'm going to pause there and just read your chat, but I'd encourage you to stop here and type any questions or comments you have up until this point. Oh boy, large groups, Peggy, can be really challenging, and we're going to talk about some of the things you might want to consider when it comes to using large groups or working with large. Okay, I'm going to keep moving through. I do want to encourage you to keep typing in that chat, but in the meantime, I want to ask you to really talk to me about what your teams, your students, your professors, what are they seeing as advantages and objections to using virtual classroom tools like Adobe Connect? So if you could take a minute and type what you're hearing from them in these pods that you see on screen. And notice I have 2 chat pods superimposed on top of my PowerPoint slide. So these are just movable, sizable pods that I've put in position here, so it will visually make sense to you when we're doing this exercise. So go ahead and type. Oh, yeah, I love all those advantages too. Not bound by geography. I've been working from my home office for 15 years, doing webinars and web training and web stuff. I still get on planes occasionally, but not like I had to when I was working in a classroom every day for over 9 years. I had to go there every single day to teach my students, and now, excuse me, now I can meet my students from wherever we are. Yeah, bunny slippers. Actually, it's more like socks, but okay. Yeah, recording comments, Matt. I think this is an under-observed element that the I love Plan B. You saw that I was typing to you from a different name. That's because I have 2 computers logged in for just such an occurrence. So I completely lost my session room connection just then for 10 seconds. Yes, absolutely, Nori. Add that to the objections. That isn't out of the ordinary. Having your audio not sync with your video is ordinary because we're still dealing with the infrastructure of our network. And depending on your neighborhood and your city and your region, it can be good or it could be bad. And of course, your local hardware and your local network connectivity and your local system resources also matter. So anyway, so the idea that we're capturing people's comments, it can become the foundation for an FAQ. It can become, the recordings can become a foundation for a library of recordings. It's something that we can go back and review. We can review the performance of the presenter and the performance of the participants. How excellent. We weren't able to do that in the face-to-face classroom. Of course, there is the counter now that people like asynchronous. They like working on their own so much and doing things at their own time that now we need to sort of sell them on the synchronous, the group-oriented learning, the community-oriented learning. And so that might be a bit of a pendulum swing for some of you that people have gone so far the other way, you want to get them back to the middle and be a little bit more social with their learning. Yep, Java and audio issues. Here it's not Java, we're dealing with Flash. This is all Flash-based. Learning to engage in a virtual classroom. Yeah, they can't hide, Peggy, you're totally right. How present are they, Matt? I think that's a really good question because it's very easy to be logged in someplace else too. I can certainly be responding to emails and Facebook posting while I'm doing something else, which is why it's crucial, I think, to ask that thing I called poll 0. Remember our poll 0 just a few minutes ago? That was your commitment, your accountability. Beyond my ability to force you to learn, you need to become accountable. And I reminded you that you're adults and you get to make that choice. And of course, your learners are too, and they are given that choice. So be clear about it. Are you here? Are you present? Or are you not present? And if you have to go to the bathroom, great. We have a feature for that. Go ahead and change your status to stepped away. It mutes your microphone, and it also gives us an indicator that lets us know that that person isn't really in their seat anymore. They're not present. So when you're calling people back from breaks, you might say, hey, when you go on break, change your status to stepped away. And when you come back, change your status to step in. And then also maybe show green check mark or something. Of course, people can't multitask, right? We task swap quickly, but we're not really multitasking. So stay with me. Stay focused, and I appreciate your feedback in chat there. I think it's really helpful to have participants typing instead of me just giving you bulleted lists. And speaking of bulleted lists, I want to challenge you to change the way your online files look. I could give you a bulleted list of what I think the advantages are, but I think this is much more fun and hopefully more memorable. So sure, there are advantages. All these different players see different advantages to using these tools. And these people's perspectives were a little bit different from yours, but for the most part, people see the advantage of the cost savings, the travel savings, and some people actually do see that it is more effective than face-to-face. They're able to engage with other learners and with the trainer much more directly than they were in a face-to-face classroom. And it doesn't matter, you know, it's kind of the great equalizer. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter how well your language skills are or how good your language skills are. You can show up in this classroom and participate evenly and equally with all others. And if we're using primarily the chat function in contrast to the voice over IP audio, even more so, because all participants could be typing in this back channel that I have now promoted. I've encouraged you to use the back channel, and now you get to contribute equally with the other participants. And notice also, you can type questions anytime. So questions don't need to be held to the end, and they also don't need to derail me while I'm in the middle of my scripted presentation. So I can wait and take questions at the end of that section, but I don't need to be distracted by questions as they're coming in. In fact, right now I'm kind of ignoring chat because I don't want to be distracted. But while you're taking a look at this slide, I'll pause and read chat. And of course, these are some of the typical objections that we see. The word management is up there, but it's really, of course, all players, all participants, all faculty members are going to notice that this is different, and there are things about it that are awkward and painful sometimes. Believe me, painful sometimes. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. You know, that doesn't mean that it's not worth it, because driving to a training classroom with high heel shoes on is painful for me, but I did that for a long time. So consider that as your alternative. Yeah, effort and the outreach are important. Yeah. At some point, it's better to distribute a recording. I'm totally with you, Matt. And I would say if you don't have any interactivity, any live engagement in your training session, then what is the point of getting everybody together at the same date and time? Can't you just record what you were going to say, a la TED Talks? Those are recorded, and you watch those, and they're fascinating. So sure, we can do recordings. And if we're all going to meet here at the same date and same time and log in and jump through hoops, let's engage with each other. Let's actually have a conversation here, a dialogue. So let's keep going through the content and see if you know what I mean by this. And I love this picture. It really, I feel this way many, many times, because you think I'm managing this brilliantly. And I know that there's a bazillion things. I hope you think I'm managing brilliantly. But I know there's a bazillion things in the background that are distracting, that are popping up, that are technically challenging. I get logged out of the session for no apparent reason. Sometimes things just don't work the way I expected them to work for any number of reasons. Some I never know the answer. But I think that when you start to boil it down, you're essentially looking at what we found in the Guild research back in 2010, that when set up and used properly, synchronous online sessions are as effective as good face-to-face classroom sessions. So this audience said 88% agreed that when set up and used properly, it was as good face-to-face. And also, the Department of Education did some research and found out that regardless of what modality the learners were using, whether it was online or face-to-face, they performed modestly better. There really wasn't a ton of difference, but they performed modestly better on average to those in face-to-face. So learning online was a little bit better. And I'm going to say let's call it even. And I'm also going to say let's not pretend that all face-to-face classroom training is inherently good and all online training is inherently bad. It has everything to do with the design and the delivery. So I'm saying to you at this point, if you design your content, if you design your materials to use the features of the software to engage your learners on a meaningful level, then you're going to have the same kind of results that you had in the physical classroom. And, you know, when you think about that, like really, what was it? What was it that you were doing in the physical classroom that worked so well? And I'm going to actually bring up a special chat pod here. So I'm going to ask you to type in this chat pod, what does good mean? What were you doing that was so good in the physical classroom? Okay, I'm scanning your comments from earlier, and I'm not really sure about the research report as far as how deep they went into the data. That might have just been people's opinions as far as effect sizes and so forth. But the research that's been coming out over the last couple of years is pretty consistent, that it's the same. It's not any different. It all has to do with the way it's delivered and not the modality that it's delivered in. And Matt says, I'm not a big fan of polls and surveys and self-reporting. And I think that there's a time and a place. You know, there's a time and a place for self-reporting like level 1 evals. Yes, it was good. Yes, the trainer was good. Yes, I thought it was effective. Yes, I learned. Okay, it doesn't mean a lot to us, but it means something to us. So there's that. But then there's, the deeper testing. I could be using poll questions to test you, to find out if you know the correct answer, A, B, C, D, or E. And I don't have to show the results to the other audience members, so there's no muddying it. Maybe they're looking up the answer in a book in front of them, but that's another issue for online testing. But what I'm really hoping here is just to engage the learners on another level. And whether I have 10 students or 1,000 students, if you're typing answers into this chat pod, I know you're with me. I know you're out there and you're listening and you're engaging. And if there were 1,000 of you responding to a poll, it wouldn't make any difference. I'm just seeing the overall percentages, so it doesn't really matter how many people are there. But when I've been in very, very large groups and I have participants typing in chat, which so far I've only had 4 people type in the chat pod on the left. Could you guys make a little effort here and add a little bit more to that chat pod over there? But as I do this, I notice, of course, there's repetition. I'm focusing the participants on answering a particular question. I want to keep the conversation going the direction I want the conversation to go. So rather than wrapping up a session and asking, are there any questions, which might take me in 100 different directions, I'd rather ask you the question and have you go in the direction that I want you to go in. Thanks, Mary Beth. Yep. So I think that what you're seeing here is that we can do the same types of things in the online classroom as we were doing in the physical classroom. We can promote inquiry, we can model, we can demonstrate, we can do group activities with hands-on. Of course, the hands-on is virtual hands-on, not physical hands-on in many cases. You can facilitate small and large group dialogue. You could use breakout groups, which we'll look at in tomorrow's session. So there are many things that you can be doing. You just have to adapt the way you do them. And in some cases, shift the focus. So if in my physical classroom I love to do small group activities, that might be fine for the physical classroom, but online, that might become very time-consuming. So how can I take this essence of that exercise and shorten it and bring it into an online format? And it might mean breakout groups. It might just mean multiple chat pods like you've seen me using here. So I'm going to move this chat pod off the screen. And yeah, Matt, great, both sync and async. I've been teaching some classes lately using an asynchronous tool called Bloomfire. And in between the live programs, participants are asked to post homework assignments and recordings of themselves. And then other participants provide feedback, a la YouTube, where I can go and say, that's great, or I didn't like that part, or I think you could make this part better. So the feedback process becomes more powerful because we've moved into this asynchronous space to support those exercises. So, I thought these tips that came from the author of the eLearning Guild research report, Patty Shank, she sort of distilled that research report down to say that the best times to use Synchronous for your training is in these cases. So take a look at this list. She includes building motivation and excitement, so getting people together, when it makes sense to set aside time, so you take people off-site and do a retreat, that kind of stuff. Now we're doing that virtually, so you set aside time to learn. When that live support is needed, where participants are likely to need some feedback and exchanges with other people along the way. When you want people to learn from each other, when you want people to think about this in their own context and share that with the group, when you want to connect and really see and touch people more directly, when you need that quick response, people are going to have questions, people are going to have problems, people are going to get stuck and they need a facilitator logged in, and when people are geographically dispersed, which is one that we're pretty comfortable with as a great option or a great benefit. So which of these, hang on, let me just change how this poll displays. And I'm going to show this to you in a multiple answer format, which means you've got checkboxes. So which of these are crucial for your training? Which of these do you think sort of makes sense then for using a virtual classroom environment because you want these things? And I see some participants responding now. Thanks so much. And Peggy, is the poll for a learner as a teacher? In your case, I'm asking you as a teacher. Thanks for clarifying that, yep. And I'm going to go ahead and show the polling results coming in. So it's nice for me to see where you are as far as what you think is important, because I see that live support element is really lighting up and that connection piece. So even though some of your learners might like asynchronous, and maybe a ton of your content does end up in an asynchronous format, there's still value to that blended component that says, let's get back together again and talk about this, or let's get back together and debrief, or let's brainstorm, or let's see each other's examples and give feedback. So there is value to the asynchronous and the synchronous components there. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. Thanks so much for your feedback on that one. And in line with this research that we saw from the Guild a couple of years ago, Ruth Clark also did some research and looked at she didn't do the research herself, she looked at the research that was out there, and she distilled it down to this. She essentially said, it's not the media that causes the learning, but how the media are used. And her recommendation was to use the delivery medium, whether it's electronic or traditional, and exploit the features in ways that lead to learning. So it's not complicated. You've got polls, great, use polls. You've got chat, okay, use chat. You've got the ability to show PowerPoints or video files or SWIFT files, great, do it. And I see that Vivian has a hand raised now. Thanks so much for letting me know that you agree with this concept. And for others, if you agree with what Ruth Clark has said here, go ahead and show hand raise, and I'll pause and read what you've been writing in chat. You know, in any case with learners, it really requires them to carve out the time to do the work, whatever that means, and to stay committed to it until the end. And we can only provide the resources. We can't make them commit. So there's always going to be an excuse from somebody about why they couldn't. But we're here to facilitate the people who can and do. And of course, because we can record these sessions, there is that sort of secondary solution for people who couldn't make the date and time. Do they still get value out of reviewing a recording when they couldn't be there to respond to questions or to contribute to the brainstorming themselves or to complete the assignments or take the tests themselves? Well, it depends. It really depends on the courseware itself, and it depends on that learner. But when I ask you questions, whether or not you write the answers, your mind still goes to work to answer them. So I think listening to a recording where somebody's asking a lot of questions, it's still going to stimulate the learners to contribute on an intellectual level. Anyway. Okay, so as we continue to move through here, I want you to think about the tools that are available in this interface. So you've got the status indicators, and I can use that for binary polling, like can you hear me or do you agree, or show bunny to speed up. You know, I'm not sure what you might use those for. There's the sharing function that you're seeing me use here, and the sharing function is where I put content that I want to display to you. So I can share a PowerPoint, a PDF, Flash video, MP3 or MP4, or I can do a live share, meaning I can application share, show an application that's running on my desktop and display my content to you. And I'll show you that in just a minute. What it ends up looking like is what you'll see in a minute here, an Excel interface, an Excel application displayed in this square that's on the left side of your screen. There is the ability with this interface to broadcast web links to people and even to force browser windows open. So if I wanted to say to you, hey, go to this SurveyMonkey website and complete a survey at the end of this session, I could force the SurveyMonkey window open on your computer just by using this links pod. I can also invite you to respond by having links display on the PowerPoint, and you can click on those links and launch those browsers yourself. If it's a hypertext link in PowerPoint, it'll be clickable to participants once you upload it into the interface. So look for that hypertext underscore and blue text, and you'll know that that'll be clickable to participants when you get there. You do also have the ability to use some minor annotation functions. Here I'm using one that the trainer might use, just a green arrow that I can use to point, but I can also give over controls to participants to do things more related to what you might do with a marker on a flip chart, like drawing like this. I can use that for myself as a presenter, or I can turn on that function for you as a participant. And I'll show you that in a little bit. Of course, we have polling. You don't know this, but I have a tool that lets me see if you're paying attention or not. It gives me a gauge that shows whether or not you've got the Adobe Connect interface in the foreground or in the background on your computer. There's also that ability to type privately in chat. And here I've just got an overall screen that's showing you, in addition to the PowerPoint slides, a question and answer pod that allows me to capture participants' questions, but they don't see the answers that I'm giving. They don't see each other's questions, and they don't see the answers unless I select those options as being available. So I see questions over here on the right side, and I can answer, and I can make those answers public or private. So that's a question and answer function. And I was not referring to collaborate. Oh no, somebody else is referring to collaborate. So also in Adobe Connect we have the breakout room function. So I can subdivide the names in the attendee list into what are essentially folders. And then when I click on Start, you all get moved into those subfolders. So you get moved into a room that looks just like this Adobe Connect room, but it would just be with a smaller group of people. It can be tough to set that up. It can get complicated to set it up. But in tomorrow's session, I'm going to talk more about using breakout groups, and I'll talk more about some tricks for setting up groups so that you can do things like have unique pods for some groups, and unique pods in the room, as well as pods that are used by everybody at the same time. So some fancy breakout activities there. So again, I talked about this at the beginning of our session. I think it's important that you have learn to learn tutorials at the beginning of your sessions, whether that's part of your content PowerPoint or as a separate file, so participants have a good understanding of what features are going to be available to them and how to use them. Then as far as sharing goes, we talked a little bit about sharing, and sorry about the formatting here. This got a little messed up when I uploaded, but you have multiple different ways to share. You can upload a file like I've done here where I can show you my PowerPoint slide on screen. I can upload audio or video files as long as they're these file types. I can't upload just any file type. I'm limited to what's available here. I can also do live sharing, desktop sharing, like I can show anything that's running on my screen as long as it's in the foreground, it'll be visible to the participants, or application sharing, which lets me show just one thing at a time, not my entire desktop, but Word or Excel or whatever is the one thing I want to share. But there's a different type of sharing too that is more like an FTP transfer, where I can transfer files to you and you can download files from there. And I'll give you an example of that. In the lower right corner of the screen here, you see a files pod that is right now empty. But I'm going to use a little technique where I can go and grab the PowerPoint that I have showing right now, and I'm going to make that PowerPoint visible in that files pod there. So you don't have to do it now, but if you wanted to download that file, you could click the file name, then click the download button, and that file would then get transferred to your local drive. The steps can be a little tricky because the first thing that's going to happen is a new browser window will open, and then you'll see an additional download button in that browser. So if you're interested in this PowerPoint deck that I'm using, you can download it from there. One of the things that we often do when it comes to sharing is live application sharing. So right now I'm showing you a PowerPoint file that has been uploaded. And the advantage to uploading it first is the file will cache to the individual user's machine as we're using the file. So it doesn't download, but it does essentially deliver some of the information as the participants are watching. But when I want to, so it's caching as I'm moving ahead through the slides. So little by little you're receiving that file. But sometimes I don't want a static file like this one. I want to show you my actual Excel program running on my machine. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Excel and open up my application sharing. And I hope that someone can confirm with me that they're able to see my Excel program right now. So now that I'm application sharing Excel, you can see me doing things in the cells, like entering in functions and creating formulas. And of course I'm doing this live and you're seeing this live. And if you've used application sharing before, this is probably not that impressive. But something that I think is really cool about this is if I wanted to call on a participant at this point and ask them to drive Excel for us, I could turn over controls of my shared application to one of you. And then you would be able to click in cell F11 and do what it takes to create a formula to calculate that column. Now, the trick is, and I'm going to move out of application sharing to get back to where you are. Actually, I'm going to stay right here for a minute. The trick is I have to have given one of you presenter rights first. I can't do this unless you have presenter rights. So I would have had to come back here, give somebody presenter rights, and then they have the option to request remote control. But think of that in the context of getting participants to contribute to the conversation and to play along. Would you be able to use that in order to engage learners at that level? Of course, you're not going to take turns with 100 students doing that, but one at a time, it would be a valuable exercise for some courses. So go ahead and give me an example of what you think you might use something like that for, where you could be application sharing and then turn over controls to the participants. And if you hadn't noticed, you're now seeing me application share the Adobe Connect environment, which somebody asked earlier, how different does it look? It not only looks different in that I have extra menu choices, but every one of the pods that I use has additional features. And also, to the right side of my screen, I have this space called the presenter only area. And you can see here that I have pods that have been hidden off to the side. I can see our polling pod from earlier. I can see any private notes that I might be typing with any of the other hosts that are on the session. You can see a blow-by-blow of my slides and the activities that we'll be doing on each slide. So in this presenter notes pod, I've put where I've got my poll 0, where I showed you 2 chats, where I application share Excel, and things like that. Thanks, George. So I've got all this displayed on the right side of my screen as well. And there's one more thing, way, way, way over here on the right side of the screen. Remember when I just neatly kind of jumped over to show you 2 chat pods at the same time? I was using this button that allows me to preset how the pods are configured and then just easily jump from one to the next. So notice right now I'm on a layout called Intro, and now I'm going to click on one called 2 Chats. And a couple things are going to happen here. The screen is going to change, and these 2 pods are going to display on screen where they weren't before. So I'm essentially going to my preset worksheets in order to display activities to you. Okay. While I'm in this environment, I may as well show you that I can also give participants specific controls. Let's say I wanted these participants to have access to drawing tools. I can go in and change the enhanced participant rights and say I'm going to give you whiteboard privileges, or I'm going to give you share pod privileges. And that way you can use those pods the same way I do. So I've given a handful of participants additional rights, and when I stop sharing and I want to show you something like this word search, I can turn on drawing tools and you can use the word search puzzle to participate. Oops, some of you didn't get the the extra privileges there, so I'm going to turn on Enhanced Participant Rights. And this is actually an activity if you'd like to play along. It's intended to be an icebreaker, having participants use the highlighter tool to find the words in the blue box on the left side of the screen. But I had to have turned on the privileges for the participants to have access to those drawing tools. And also notice, oops, don't click on the draw button because that turns it off for everybody. I also had to have the forethought to have included the instructions on the screen. So think about your PowerPoint slides and any activities that you have where there's some kind of question about how participants will contribute. It's useful to include some prompt or command. Do this, type in chat, respond to the poll, use the highlighter tool. Otherwise, you have to explain that over and over again to people, and it isn't always self-explanatory. It's not obvious to people how to use these tools, especially since I could maybe I'm supposed to raise my hand and speak up, maybe I'm supposed to wait for a poll, maybe there's going to be a special chat pod, I don't know. But you guys are doing really well with this. I'm going to move back to our other view where we are still seeing, oops, we're not still seeing the PowerPoints. I'll bring the PowerPoint back up again. When I started application sharing just a minute ago, I emptied the pod that I was using so I could application share. And now I refilled it with the same file that we were using. And that file is the PowerPoint that I just transferred. And you can download this file if you want. So I think it's helpful to encourage your participants to chat more so that you can communicate with them more regularly. I'm seeing you typing in chat while I'm talking. I can see your questions at any point during the presentation. So in your sessions, what do you have to chat about? What kinds of questions might you ask participants? What kinds of activities would require some kind of instructions on screen or some kind of feedback within the chat pod or the polls? I do not see who's editing the screen, no. Thanks, Nori. Yep, and only the presenter, only the facilitator of the program or the host needs to have a license. Everybody else is sharing that one person's license. Okay, so here's a tip that I want to leave you with for today's session. And of course, I have a lot more content that I'm going to show during tomorrow's session. But I would say my #1 tip to anybody new to using virtual classroom tools is to ask more questions. Ask lots of questions. Open questions, closed questions, chat questions, poll questions, and then wait for people to respond. If you do that, I promise you the dynamics of your sessions will change. But the big question is, how long do you wait? So I'm going to put a poll here and ask you to tell me how long you think you need to wait to get participants to respond. So go ahead and respond to that poll. I see your answers coming in here. That's great. Okay. So we can see that a lot of people are guessing that they should wait between 15 and 30 seconds, but I would argue that you should wait as long as it takes. Now, to be fair, after 15 or 30 seconds, if nobody's answered, reword the question and ask it again. Maybe they just really didn't know how to respond, or they didn't know that it wasn't a rhetorical question. But it's going to take them longer to respond to you than it did in the physical classroom because they're first deciding how am I supposed to respond, and then they're coming up with an answer. And along with that, notice that every time I've asked you to respond, you did. Actually, I should say there was one time you didn't respond. But if I prompt you for participation by putting these prompts right on screen, it's obvious then to both of us, to all of us, what's supposed to be happening there. So I'm going to leave you with this idea, which course is going to be most challenging for you to teach online. And we have more content to cover in tomorrow's session. George, I'm going to turn things back over to you.
Terrific. Well, thanks very much, Karen, for giving us a run through the way that you think about these sessions, the way that you configure your behind the scenes work so that you can seamlessly bring in polls or questions or get individuals involved. I think that's good insight in terms of modeling the type of behavior that works well and the planning that's needed to be effective in this kind of environment. For our session tomorrow, we are going to, and it starts 2 hours later than I believe ours today did. For the session tomorrow, we're going to continue in this theme of thought, if you will. We'll spend time looking more so at advanced techniques for developing and leading online sessions. So for those of you that are able, please join us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks again, Karen, for a great session.